In the year 1819, William Browne's Indian servants did something that was extraordinary. They fought back. My interest at knowing why they had gone to the authorities was thwarted by every website I went to. All they said was that in 1819 these servants had gone to Governor Macquarie to complain of mistreatment. Governor Macquarie then went on to refer the case to a special bench of magistrates to look into the issue. But what did these servants complain about? I happened to chance upon an interview of Michelle Linder, who was the co-curator for an exhibition at the Australian Maritime Museum entitled East of India Forgotten Trade with Australia. She talks about finding the transcripts of these statements in a 900-page document that was from a British inquiry into the East India Company and slave trade in the year 1826. It took me 3 days to find this document in the UK Parliamentary Papers repository, and when I did, I decided to narrate some of the complaints that were made, which ultimately resulted in 35 being sent back in the year 1819 and the remaining 4 being sent back in the year 1820. But first, I want to acknowledge them. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce some of these names, as there were discrepancies in the way they were written across multiple documents. The names of the 39 persons who exhibit complaints against W. Browne, according to the Slavery in India Correspondence of Court report. Azim, steward. Bow, steward's wife. Kareen, steward. Abraham, tailor. Woodchub, washerman. Luchwan, washerman's wife. Jittu, ironer and plater. Bagdin, a house girl and an orphan. Pari, a house girl and an orphan. Tumusa, a woman's servant. Mabu, male servant of all work. Jonah, male servant of all work. Denu, a field servant. Kinu, a field servant. Bhavani, another field servant. Lochman, Pohar Singh, Singaram, the elders. Durgaram Das and Takuri Das, carpenters, and Luchman Jr., another carpenter. The following are some of the field servants who were under the employment of William Browne: Sokani, Kitua, Meggu, Moteram, Trebun, Asman, Bahades, Gopal, Basteram, Tejna, Hoga, Gose, Chaindmune, Jira, Jumna, Ganga, Chamin, and Ketia. The following are some of the complaints that were made against William Browne. Bhavani, a servant of Mr. Browne, said, "I have been fed upon Indian corn contrary to my agreement. I have had plenty. I was at the farm when Mr. Cornelius O'Brien threatened to shoot me with a musket if I dared to leave it. I was kept up all night picking Indian corn. I was building a hut and there was some deficiency in the work, and Mr. Browne Glossy whipped me 5 strokes. We all worked all day every Sunday. My time of agreement is expired, and I want to go home. I have had a bottle of rum for which I was charged 2 rupees, and it was half water." Kenu, a servant of Mr. Browne's. "They all came to Sydney, and I came down. I complained that Mr. Browne beat me about 18 months ago with a horsewhip. I was doing something in the cattle yard, and master beat me. He also beat me once more, 3 strokes. Till Mrs. Browne's arrival, I had no complaint to make of food, since which I have been fed with bran bread, and not enough of that. Mr. Cornelius O'Brien ordered me out in the middle of the night some time ago to pick corn. It was 3 or 4 days after we first arrived at the farm, and threatened us with a musket if we did not. I did not complain to Mr. Browne. I was sent to the 5 islands, and was employed in fencing, digging, and falling trees, and in working with the sawyer for 3 months. But Mr. Browne promised to advance my wages, but did not do so." Baste Ram, another servant of Mr. Browne's, said, "I have been frequently beaten, and sometimes have had food, and sometimes none. Mr. Browne kicked me behind, and then made my mouth bleed. I was again beat for not bringing grass enough, and my food was stopped, and I had not any for 3 days. I was fed on corn, flour, rice, and dal at different times. I had not sufficient. I was employed setting fire to trees. I was frequently beaten. I always worked on Sunday for Mr. Browne. I was ordered to gather cow dung while I was ill of a fever, and Mrs. Browne beat me with a stick because I did not gather enough. Mr. Browne said I was a lazy fellow and would send me home. And finally, Thomasy, a female servant of Mrs. Browne, said, I came from India with Mrs. Browne. I was the lady's dresser, worked needlework. She used to beat me most shamefully on the slightest occasion, if I forgot to do anything. Mr. John Browne beat me twice, once with a rattan, then with his hand on my face. He cut my eye. He thrashed me on the steps. Mr. Browne never beat me here. I had as much food as I could eat, sometimes flour, sometimes rice of a bad quality, sometimes dal, no ghee. I never got any wages nor clothes. Such clothes as I had were given me by Mrs. Browne's friends, 2 suits of clothes. When I did not work, I got no food. I did everything I was ordered. I was beat by Mrs. Browne at the farm at the Devil's Back. I have been so long with Mr. Browne without wages, and I want some. I have been with him from my infancy.